Welcome to Life and Leadership with David Gadberry. We're excited that you're joining our leadership community. There's a lot of information about leadership, but a lot of times it's too sterile for real life. Life is messy and leadership can be messy. Here we talk about real leadership in the context of real life. If you're a leader looking for tips, insight, and wisdom on leadership, you can follow David on social media. And for upcoming group coaching experiences and more, go to gadberry.org. David is the lead pastor of Summit Church in Canyon, Texas, and we would love to invite you to be a part. For more information, go to yoursummitchurch.com. This is the Life and Leadership Podcast.
Hey, welcome to Life and Leadership with David Gadberry. I'm David Gadberry, and I'm so glad that you've joined us today. And we're just trying to talk a little bit about leadership. You know, one of the things over the 30 years of doing leadership that has been pretty interesting to me is that when we try to learn about leadership and develop leadership within ourselves and within maybe our organization or our teams or even in our families, our relationships, we pursue it by listening to leaders, watching leaders, interacting with leaders, or learning how to lead ourselves, maybe reading books, listening to podcasts. And one thing that I found to be true across the board, even though most of the time it's not intentional, a lot of the time it happens that we kind of create this idea or this mindset that leadership kind of happens in a vacuum. And so all books and things based on leadership, for the most part, are based around the idea of influence, around the idea of being able to get people to move from one point to the next. And usually it'll come out in some kind of, this many principles or that many, steps or whatever. And it's a good way to communicate. But what happens a lot of the times when we communicate that in the human mind, I think a lot of times what we do is we end up thinking that it's just that simple. That if I just do A, B, C, I'm going to get D. If I add 2 plus 2, I'm going to get 4. And it's just that simple. If I'll just do these principles, if I'll just walk according to, what they're saying I should do, then this will work out for me. It will benefit me. It will help me to become the leader I should be. And the truth is all of those principles do work. And, we're people of faith, and a lot of the leadership that we teach and study and operate and function in come from, obviously a biblical perspective. And the principles themselves do work, but we're fooling ourselves sometimes when we kind of act like that's all there is to it, that we just have to have a formula and we just have to, if we do A, B, and C, and D, then this will turn out. But what that's not considering and what it's not taking into context is that life and leadership are messy, that you're not just on a blank slate and you just get to do A, B, C, D, E, but no, there's pauses in there, and there's difficulties in there. There's hardships. There's people, and we're all people, and we all work with people. So we know that can be very difficult, can be hard. And so, what we're trying to do at Life and Leadership is just kind of give the perspective that, hey, life is not easy. And therefore, leadership is not as easy as it seems. One of the most effective things for us to do in dealing with life or dealing with organizational difficulties or hardships or trouble or whatever you want to call it is leadership. And that's really, truly the fact. If we can really learn how to be a good leader and all that leadership entails, then we can achieve and accomplish and become everything that we want to become as a person or an individual or as an organization. And the truth is, that's what we want. That's what we desire, is that becoming. But we need to understand that there's more to it than just a few principles. What we need to do is learn how to take the principles of leadership and actually enact them, implement them into our everyday lives that are affected by, interference, are affected by distractions, are affected by problems, are affected by people's personalities, are affected by, the ins and outs of all of the intersection of that. And so what we're trying to do is just kind of give a perspective of, there's more to it, and we need to really be attentive to this. So thanks for joining us at Life and Leadership. And I hope that this benefits you. And so today, what I want to talk about, and by the way, if you want to, and this will be communicated at other places on this podcast, but if you want to ask questions, or if you want to get connected with us, or if you want to find out more about what we do in terms of leadership coaching and all of that, you can get involved with us just by emailing connect@gadberry.org, connect@gadberry.org. And if you email us there, then we'll be able to communicate back to you and answer any questions that you might have. And we even like to answer questions on this podcast. So if you have something you want to talk about on here, feel free to communicate to us. So today, what I want to talk to you about is story. Now, that sounds like a weird thing from a leadership perspective, but what I have come to learn is that every great leader is a good storyteller. And so if I was going to entitle this something today, I wrote a blog on this. It's just, what is your favorite story? And I think that we as leaders need to learn how to cast vision in a way that causes people to pay attention. We have vision, we have desires, we have things that we're trying to do as an individual, as an organization, but how do we get people to buy in? Because really, if you're going to influence people, and let's say you've already laid the foundation of what true leadership is, and that's service. So you're adding value to people's lives by serving their life, by serving their needs and serving their desires for growth and development. And so let's say that foundation is laid. But now, how do you get them to buy in to where you're going and what you're trying to achieve? And I think one of the things very definitely is story, narratives. Being able to take what it is you want to accomplish and actually create the story. What is the story of your vision? What is the story of your organization? What is the story of, where you've come from and where you're trying to go and what is happening in between? Because we as human beings relate to story. We do. That's just bottom line. Jesus himself, Jesus was the best teacher there ever was, the best leader there ever was. And he would tell stories. And some of those stories were, obviously fictional, but then there are other ways that he taught that were non-fictional and literally would do it in a version of story. If you look at the Bible, overall, it's one big epic story from Genesis to Revelations. It is a narrative that is putting in our understanding what human people are about, what God is about, and what happens when the two come together. And so it's very interesting how Jesus even chose to do that. They even came to him one time and asked, "Why do you tell stories?" And his basic answer was this: we're trying to draw interest. In other words, there are people who get it. And he was talking to the disciples. He said, you get it. You've been given revelation. You understand this. But there are others that have hardened their hearts and they're not going to get it. But there are those who are seeking and they're wanting truth and they're wanting to know, but they can't necessarily, if I just say it out there directly, swallow what I'm saying. It's just too difficult. It's not palatable. They can't understand. They can't get it. So what I do is I tell stories to, like they used to say, whet their whistle. I tell stories to make them thirsty, to make them hungry. That old saying, I heard a guy say one time that, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And then I heard another guy say, well, yeah, but you can put a salt lick out there and make him thirsty. And I think there's so much truth in that. And that's what telling the story is all about. Telling the story of your organization, telling the story of your vision, creating narratives that help people understand what it is you're trying to do. Now, we can make a huge mistake here. Let me just be honest. And sometimes we're not creative enough when we tell our story, and we're far too complicated or complex, I should say, in the telling of our story. When you tell your story, you're not trying to tell everything. You're not trying to get everything in, get all the pieces together, but you're trying to touch the heart of a person or the mind of a person in a way to get them to grab a hold of what it is you need them to buy into to help them take the next step in the journey of this organization or whatever it is you're trying to lead. So what is your favorite story? And I have found it to be true that most excellent leaders are excellent storytellers. They know how to cast vision. They know how to communicate in a way that grabs a listener. And basically what they're saying is, hey, pay attention. This is important. You need to get this. We really have to get to that place where we understand what we're trying to do and what we're trying to achieve. And, I've heard people say in leadership circles that if you can't explain it in simple terms, you don't really understand it yet yourself. And so I think that's true with stories as well. If we're trying to craft stories or narratives that help people understand, that grabs their attention, that helps them to be able to see where we're going and what it is we're trying to achieve in a way that grabs a hold of their passion and their desire and their perseverance and everything that it's going to take to get them there, then we've got to truly understand it ourselves. And if we start trying to tell the story, but we don't truly get where we're going ourselves, then we can really muck it up. And so you can cause more confusion than you are clarity. And that's definitely not what is meant to happen with a story. You're not trying to take people from clarity to mystery. You're trying to take people from mystery to clarity. And that's what your story should do. So, I really think it's important that we do this. And I really think there are some practical ways to do it. So I want to talk to you just a little bit about the practical principles of storytelling. So the first thing I would say to you is this: a story has the ability to freeze time, so take the time to tell it. A story has the ability to freeze time, so take the time to tell it. I'll never forget the stories a leader told to me, but I also remember the moment. There was this leader in my life when I was young. I was maybe 22, 23. And this guy was a big deal. I grew up in a certain denomination, and this guy was a big deal in our denomination. And he was at what they called camp meeting. It was a time for all these churches to come together and pastors to come together. I was a young pastor, young leader, and I was just trying to, do what I did and try to figure it out and try to become everything I was supposed to become. And I think I was doing something at the camp meeting. Maybe I sang or something like that. And somehow I got on this guy's radar, and he was the speaker. He was the main keynote speaker at this conference, if you will. And for some reason he clued into me. I think it was because I was young leader, and he was really trying to raise up young leaders. And man, I remember I was leaving. I was going out. The service was over. Everybody had, chatted and talked to each other, and then everybody was leaving to go eat or whatever. And as my wife and I were headed out the door, he said, "Hey, David," I don't know how I even remembered my name. "Hey, David, hold on just a minute." And he was at the other side of the room. And so we kind of met in the middle, and he said, "Hey, listen, why don't you go to dinner with us? I'd love to take you to dinner." And he takes me to dinner. And when he takes me to dinner, he starts, we're sitting there eating, and his wife and my wife, and we're talking, and it was just us. And first and foremost, I felt so blessed that he would even take the time to spend with me, let alone that he really was trying to pour into me. He didn't even know me, really. And maybe he'd talked to some people about me, or maybe he had just saw something in me that maybe I didn't even see in myself at the time. And I just remember he just started telling me the stories of what was going on in his conference and in the area that he was responsible for, and how these young leaders were raising up and churches were just being built and lives were being changed, and how much of an impact that leadership. And he was the first guy that really turned me on to John Maxwell and said, you got to read this book and you got to read that book. And we've experienced this. And he was telling all these stories. And I just remember as he was telling me these stories, it wasn't just the stories I was hearing. It was that moment. It was that moment. And sometimes when we're trying to grow and move towards the future in our organization, our staff, our team, our entire organization, we want them to go with us. Sometimes there needs to be moments that are high impact, that it's not just about what you're saying that is touching my soul. It's the moment itself. And that's the thing about storytelling. It has the ability to freeze time. So you want to take the time to tell it. He took time out of his schedule, which spoke volumes to me. He was adding value to my life. But even beyond that, he literally, that moment was so real to me that I remember the stories that he told, but I also remember everything about it. I remember the clothes that he was wearing. I remember his jacket was thrown over the back of his chair. I remember he had a navy blue suit on. He had a white shirt. He had a yellow tie. I remember that his wife, I remember what she was wearing. I remember what she interjected into the conversation, how her wife her and my wife were talking. It was just, I don't just remember what he said. I remembered that whole moment. That was over 30 years ago. And today I could tell you that story as if it just happened yesterday. Why? Because in his narrative, in his pulling this story, telling me the stories of these great things, it just kind of just made everything stop. And we want to be that creative with our storytelling. We want to be that impacting. And the only way you can tell stories with that kind of impact that causes everything to freeze and us to be just locked into a moment that we'll never forget is there has to be that add value component. Like he was adding value to me. You cannot be an insincere or inauthentic storyteller and expect it to have any impact. That's the truth. That's just the bottom line. And so make sure that what you're doing is true, and it's true of you, and it's authentic. I remember his wife laughed at every joke. She inserted little thoughts here and there. She seemed to be as excited as he was and as excited as we were. I remember her dress was navy, and it was trimmed in white trim. Man, what a moment. I'll never forget it. So when you're telling your story, make it exciting, but don't artificially make it exciting. Be excited about your story and be authentic when you tell your story. And don't have a motive to impact someone with your story. Just be impacting with your story. Second thing is that a story is existential. In other words, a person listening can exist in the story. So, if I heard someone say this, and I believe it's true, if when you hear Jesus talking and telling these parables, you're not putting yourself in the story as one of the characters in that story, you're missing the whole point. Because that was the point of the Bible front to back, is to get us to see ourselves in it and to understand what Jesus was really trying to say, what God was really trying to say. When we hear a story, we can put ourselves in the story and it makes it real. It makes us think, I can experience this. This could be true about me. That's a powerful thought. I'm a part of this. Every great organization has its stories, its moments where, everyone always talks about, like when there's a gathering or staff to getting together, there's always those, you remember that time when, and it's because you have a story, you have a collective story that's being created over time. And so there's those moments. And I can remember every great organization I've ever been a part of. I'm telling you, there were moments that you can just remember. They're just standout moments. And that's what a narrative does. I like what B.B. King said. He was a great jazz and, just blues singer. Such a great musician, but he was a songwriter. And his his stories were great. And here's what he said. Sometimes I just think that there are more things to be said to make the audience understand what I'm trying to do more. When I'm singing, I don't want you to just hear the melody. I want you to relive the story, because most of the songs have pretty good storytelling. That is what you're trying to do with your story. You're trying to get people to relive it. You're trying to get people to have moments later when it's hard and it's difficult and we're facing some kind of obstacle that we're going to have to get through, to remember back when we had this issue and man, everybody came together and it was like we were all thinking and stirred up and exciting and somehow we came up with solutions for that. That is what you're trying to accomplish in your organization. Telling stories, this is a third thing, telling stories can spark dreams. When we frame our point in the context of a story, it incites the imagination to go to work. So all of a sudden, limits are gone, opportunities are everywhere, and anything is possible. That's what a narrative or a story does. Especially when you place yourself in it, you see that your imagination just kind of comes alive, and you start thinking of things a little bit differently, and you start imagining what could be and what should be, and you start thinking about this is possible. Man, we don't have to be limited by this or limited by that, and that's what you're trying to do with the stories. You're trying to enliven someone's imagination till they start dreaming. And because here's the deal, in your organization, if you're a leader, you know this, whether you're a ministry leader or a business leader or, an educational leader, whatever the case is, if you're trying to lead people from A to B, they have to buy in, and they're going to buy in if you can really get them to be impassioned about it. And if you can be creative and get their attention and get their imagination going, listen, solutions are limitless. If you can get people to stop thinking based on the limits and start thinking based on the story. In other words, they can start dreaming about the story because they're a part of the story. The story for your organization isn't just about you, leader. It's about everyone you're leading and all the leaders that are developing in your organization. And so their dream folds into the dream of that story, and even to their future and what could happen later. The fourth thing is telling stories can reveal truth. Because the way stories affect us, they're a great tool to use to reveal truth. This is what I was talking about with Jesus earlier. When you tell a story, a person begins to subconsciously seek for the meaning. Okay. So when you're telling a narrative, even if you haven't gotten to the point yet, and it's always good to tell the story to kind of start with the point and then fold the story around it. But the truth is, people are automatically, subconsciously even looking for the meaning in that story. What does this mean? How does this relate? How is this relevant to me? And it opens the mind and the heart, and it provokes questions and curiosities, which is exactly what you want it to do. And it can lead to the realization, even a revelation of profound truth. This is exactly, again, why Jesus told parables. This is why the Bible is written as one epic story. Because here's what God is trying to do. Just take, for instance, Jesus as a leader. Here's what he's trying to do. When you're hearing these stories, what you're doing is you're looking for that meaning. And as you're looking for that meaning, you're seeking for the truth. Now, he's leading you to the truth through that story, and he knows you're going to arrive there if you're truly seeking. But what you want people to do is not just attach themselves to your vision because it's your vision, but you want them to find their way there. Because if they come up with it, if they think on it, if it's their thinking about that story that brings them to that truth or to that principle or to that vision, then they're going to be much more impassioned by it. They're going to hold much tighter to it. They're going to go through much harder circumstances to achieve it, simply because it's like they're a part of it, not like they're just attached to it. And so it's very important that we learn to do this. Telling stories can reveal truth. The fifth thing, I believe this is fifth, stories engage the mind and the emotions. I don't believe in emotionalism, but I believe that we're emotional creatures. And I believe that we shouldn't allow our emotions to lead us, because then our life becomes a roller coaster. But we are affected and influenced by our emotions, and there's no way around that. And when you're trying to, if you're a salesman, if you're a business leader, when you're trying to persuade people to believe in what you believe in, to follow you to the place that you need to go to achieve what it is you're trying to achieve, then you need to engage their mind, yes, but you also need to engage their heart, their emotions, the way they feel. We think deeply about the meaning of the story, but we also feel what the characters in the story felt. Whether it's a true story, whether it's a parable, whether it's an analogy, whether it's a metaphor, whatever the case may be, we don't just learn it or are informed by it. We also are inspired by it. Our feelings are engaged. I'll never forget him sitting down with me at that table. He's long since in heaven. He's passed on. But let me just say something. I'll never forget sitting at that table with him. I'll never forget that he took that time to invest in me. I'll never forget the stories that he told. I got so excited. My heart was just stirred up after I left. I talked to my wife all the way home, 90-0, just and this and this and that and that. And it was because he didn't just speak to my mind and my intellect. He spoke to my heart and my emotions. And that's what a story does. Here's what it does. It's what Maya Angelou said. She said, I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And that is such a powerful tool. So I just want to encourage you. Stories help people understand. They help us to identify. They help us to get our point across. They help us to remember what's important. So what's your story? What's your favorite story to tell? What's the story of your organization? What's the story of your life? What are you about? Where are you going? If you want people to follow, I'm just challenging you and encourage you as a leader today. The way to do that is to become an excellent storyteller and allow yourself to go there and use the creativity of this. And I'm telling you, people will get on board. So that's it. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. And in life, when we face difficulties and we face hardships and we face problems, a lot of the times what gets us through is the memorializing of a story that was true about our organization at one point or the other. We made it through because everyone came together and it was so awesome. Do you remember the time? And so you want to be clearly and continually telling your stories and letting those stories be held up as symbols to your organization that say, we know we're going to make it. We know we're going to succeed. We know we're going to achieve. We know we're in this together because this is our story. All right. So thanks so much for joining us for Life and Leadership today. And I just want to encourage you to be the leader that you are intended to be. And man, let people be a part of your story and see if it doesn't just expand and grow and develop into just one of the greatest stories ever. And so I just want to encourage you to do that. Hey, add value to someone today. Make a difference in someone's life, because I guarantee you, when you add value to someone else, the greater value is added back to you. God bless you. Have a great day.
Thanks for being a part of the Life and Leadership podcast all around the world. We have listeners that are a part of our leadership family in Nigeria, Sweden, South Korea, United Kingdom, and all over the United States. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Castro, Castbox, and Podchaser. For video version of this podcast, you can subscribe on YouTube.